The idea that Donald Trump could compel Vladimir Putin to accept specific terms in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has stirred considerable debate among political analysts. Trump's stance on foreign relations, particularly with Russia, has always been a subject of scrutiny and speculation, with some of his supporters and critics believing that he might use economic, diplomatic, or military leverage to bring about a resolution. Trump's approach to Russia. Trump has long advocated for a more transactional and pragmatic approach to international relations. His America First policy often emphasized reducing military involvement abroad and prioritizing U.S. economic interests. This has shaped his stance toward the Ukraine conflict, where he has previously suggested that he could strike a deal with Putin that could bring about a swift end to the war, albeit with terms that might be seen as controversial in the West. One of the primary concerns is whether Trump would be willing to negotiate directly with Russia over Ukraine's territorial integrity, potentially offering concessions. Trump has repeatedly stated his belief in the possibility of negotiating peace with Putin, even suggesting at times that he could bring Putin to the negotiating table and work out a settlement. He has also pointed to the fact that, during his presidency, there was no direct military confrontation with Russia, which some see as evidence of a diplomatic approach that avoided escalating tensions. Chatham House. This perspective has led to fears that Trump might push Ukraine into accepting a peace deal that could require ceding control over territories currently under Russian occupation, such as Crimea and the Donbas region. Challenges and consequences of such a deal. However, Trump's proposed methods to resolve the conflict come with significant risks. First, such a move would likely face significant resistance from Ukraine and its allies, particularly from NATO and the European Union. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly emphasized that Ukraine will not entertain any negotiations that involve territorial concessions, given the immense cost in terms of lives lost and the sovereignty of the nation at stake. For Putin, any deal that does not recognize Russia's territorial gains would be seen as a failure, potentially undermining his standing domestically and internationally. From a broader geopolitical perspective, any deal brokered by Trump that forces Ukraine into making concessions could also have far-reaching consequences for NATO and the EU. These institutions have strongly supported Ukraine's territorial integrity and its right to self-determination, with NATO providing military and financial support. If Trump were to press Putin for terms that went against the principles of Ukrainian sovereignty, it could fracture these alliances and potentially weaken Western influence in the region. TVP.info. Can Trump force Putin to accept terms? One of the most significant questions in this debate is whether Trump, or any US president, can truly force Putin into accepting terms. The Russian president has shown little interest in compromise when it comes to issues involving Russia's territorial expansion and influence in former Soviet states. Putin has used the war in Ukraine not only to secure strategic objectives, but also to project power on the global stage. Therefore, Trump would need to employ a combination of diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and potentially military deterrence to force Putin to consider a deal. However, this would require significant international coordination, as well as the willingness of Putin to step back from the brink of his geopolitical goals. Strategic leverage. Trump has shown interest in using economic sanctions as a tool to pressure Russia, and it is likely that such measures would continue to be a part of his strategy if he were to return to the presidency. Economic sanctions, if applied effectively and backed by international partners, could hurt the Russian economy and reduce the Kremlin's ability to sustain its military operations. Additionally, Trump might consider increasing US military presence in Europe, especially in NATO countries bordering Russia, to send a clear signal of US commitment to its allies and a warning to Russia. However, it is unclear whether these strategies would be sufficient to force Putin into serious negotiations on terms favorable to the West and Ukraine. The challenge is that Putin has a long history of resisting external pressure, and Russia's military capabilities, combined with the ongoing internal narratives of Russian nationalism and the need to protect perceived Russian interests, would make any agreement that requires significant territorial concessions unlikely without heavy external influence. The role of public opinion. Trump's approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict would also be influenced by public opinion, both in the United States and ABR.